Welcome everyone, Dr. Thor here. Get ready for Gnosis. Well, what I'm going to cover here is a review of the book and movie The Men That Stare at Goats by Ron Ranson, a British journalist, now a United States citizen living in upstate New York, which I kind of find interesting. Well, he was I don't know if he was the first one or not, but he wrote a very popular book talking about the U.S. military program that tried to reform themselves after the Vietnam debacle, which is a very complicated issue, the Vietnam War. While the American fighting man has never been beat in any major conflict since, I guess, Korea, where they certainly were beat on the ground for a period of time, yet the conflict, which still kind of went to a standstill, and there's never been a peace agreement, there's just a truce going on there. Basically has never lost things, particularly in Vietnam and other places, because of air support. So the average American fighting man certainly is a competent warrior and well armed and extremely well supported, yet hasn't really achieved very much because of the American military command. And those same idiot commanders were the same ones that went into Iraq and other places and screwed it up there. And we have a long history, Americans, of incompetent leaders. General George S. Patton, the Nazi Muslim who wanted to save Hitler. General Douglas MacArthur, who surrendered the Philippines with virtually no fight. So we've got a long history of bad military officers. So, which nobody wants to talk about. They're all heroes. Let's make movies about them that are all incorrect. So what happened in Vietnam, and what caused that problem? Well, it's very complicated. As a person who grew up in that era and had some family involved in it, I was fairly attentive of what was going on there. And it was, of course, there was military blunders that were constantly done. The American military really didn't know how to fight a war like that. And didn't really take too much credence from the fact. And the French, who were involved in these things, they refused to help them. The French asked us to come in and help them when they were having problems, and we didn't. So then we came in, wanted to fight it ourselves, and of course, there's a problem there. And these things are civil wars, there are no support. And of course, as usual, Americans are so ignorant and stupid, they always support the bad guy. Ho Chi Minh wanted our support. We should have backed Ho Chi Minh and wouldn't have had all these problems. Ho Chi Minh became a, quote, communist because that's who gave him guns to fight the people invading his country, otherwise known as the French. So, certainly Vietnam is not a French place. It's a colony, and of course, nobody's held any colonies. I don't know if there's any colonies even left anywhere. I mean, the British gave up Bermuda, an island. So, we need to understand this as a big picture. So, but the point is the U.S. military came out of that because they did try hard, and they couldn't really control anything when it came down to it, even though politically they weren't allowed to fight that war correctly. So, Lieutenant Colonel Jim Shannon came up with the 1st Earth Battalion. Well, we got to look at war different. And what happened is that particular book, which Booklet, which he wrote, became the basis of this movie, as well as remote viewing program. But this is mostly about the 1st Earth Battalion and how it turned into this psychic remote viewing, the bastardized word the military uses instead of psychic. And he wrote this book kind of as a sarcastic book, to just kind of get people to think differently. That we should go into to battle with sparkly eyes, playing traditional music from that country, carrying sheep, so people would see us as this great people they want to be with. I'm not sure that that works either. You're an invader. You're in somebody's country. Nobody likes people from somewhere else, even if you come from another town in the United States. They don't like you. This town are owned by other people. This is the kind of territorial illness that you run into in countries. So people find. Of course, I think all countries do this. People don't understand that England, otherwise known as the UK or the United Kingdom, which is kind of a joke, has 2 separate countries in there. One's called Wales and one called Scotland. And they don't want to be run by other people on that island. And it is an island. So then there's everybody's are different for him. There's the English, there's the British. It's all these things. It's kind of interesting, but certainly not understood by most people of how the conflicts are. People like to say that there's horrible racism against blacks in India. Yes, there is. But at the same time, or the minute they stop fighting and hanging and torturing those people, they torture each other. So this is all over, Even in the United States, you got the Southerners, the Easterners, the Westerners, nobody likes Californians, this or that, blah, blah. The kind of nonsense that goes on by Americans against Americans is really sad. So Shannon came out and said, we got to do all these things so that we can win a war. Now, being typical military, they took this booklet as a fact. Shannon wrote it because what he stated, and I saw him in interviews, is that Americans have to learn to be cunning. Now, I've talked about the word cunning, and it's a very good word to understand. It means tricky, deceptive, to reach a particular goal. You can go up to somebody and tell them that, hey, you don't do this, if there's a problem, this could get down into a fight or something. And you talk nice to people, and what does that happen? We agree to disagree? I've heard that for years. There's no such thing as that. When you disagree with someone, they want to kill you. It doesn't matter what it is. Plain and simple. They have no intentions of respecting you on any level. So what is cunning? Now that is a straightforward way that people think is honest. No, the cunning way is to go, hey buddy, what's going on here? And then you pull back and punch him right in the face. Because that's what's going to happen. Why prepare him with, hey, don't do this? That never works. So the whole idea is he wanted people to be cunning. He talked about this in interviews directly with people, and there are some rare interviews out there. And I've watched all these. I've had a great interest in the military, how they actually function. I find it fascinating. What does the military do? I'm going to have lots of different particular videos here on military practices and what they do. It's very interesting of how the military fights a war, particularly on the ground, which is all that counts in the end. So, people had to be cunning. He stated it. He stated this wasn't supposed to be taken seriously in terms of doing these things. But it got into lots of different areas, expanded into everything that the military embraced, from subliminals to using music to try and tame someone. But as usual, all of it came down to ultimately torture. So that's what they did. That's what they do in all these places, and I'm not sure any of that works. I think it's a childish way to handle people when basically it's all about conquering and holding and subduing. And that's what it's all about. And it's about the populace. It's about women. It's about children. These are the people you have to hold and make sure that you indoctrinate and control, because that's who runs the country, not some guy with a gun. But military is pretty stupid and very self-centered and completely unregulated, with a bunch of politics and their horrendous drunken whoring attitudes that all military are notorious for and has never changed. I mean, do you understand your military has a mall in the country of Germany just for their people? Ramstein Air Force. Do you understand there's a mall there with a Walmart and everything else in a Western, supposedly allied country that has McDonald's and Burger Kings outside, but they don't want to leave the gates? It's another thing about the cowardice military, but we'll get into that and many other things. But Ronson writes about this, and his book is quite interesting. I read his book many years ago, and the first half of the book is kind of intriguing, interesting, almost lighthearted, just like he is if you listen to him in his specials. The second half of the book is really extremely dark about the murderous mind control done by the CIA, Majestic, and a person that they murdered and threw out a window. This is the only book that I've ever read that when I read the last page, I felt like somebody just dumped a giant vat of freezing cold water on the top. I've never had this happen before. A giant wave of depression swept over me. Really. But of course, that's what you should get from the book. It's a horrendous thing of how typical how any kind of weapons that are supposed to be used to save your country and protect your countrymen are used against you. There's not a single military weapon that hasn't been that was invented that wasn't used against their own people. So we got to understand that. So, keeping all that in mind, we have to be very aware of this whole program. So his book gives you a pretty good insight, and it gives you, even though I've found some wrong statements in there from my research, but I'm not going to go into all that. I think it's anyone who's interested in remote viewing and this influence and everything else, which is really what success tech and all the psychic science is about. It's about influencing. It's about manifesting. So how you do that? Well, you want to use psychic empowerment, control, to manifest. So whether it's seeing the future, controlling somebody, whatever, that's what it's all about. Everything else is nonsense. We live in a physical world. We need to first control the physical world and then hopefully go on to higher thought forms and higher levels of consciousness and spiritual being. Ultimately, it's success tech teaches how to become the level above human, because human is pretty crummy. So his book goes into that. He talks about all the noted people in the book by their right names. Sagali, he mentions all these other people that were involved in Lynn Buchanan, all the remote viewers, Joe Monaco, etc. So all of them are listed there. He talks about other people you don't hear too much about in the 1st Earth Battalion, like Lieutenant Colonel Jim Shannon and so forth. And he talks about the 1st Earth Battalion as well. So it gives you a little more interesting of something from a much more military point of view. Now, Shannon was not involved in the actual remote viewing program. He was, at that particular time, you got to remember, this is in the 70s and so forth, when everything was very open. He traveled around trying to find New Age teachings and having apparently a ball with all the hippy-dippy sex and drugs, to find out, well, what can we do different as a military to be more effective? So it gives you a very good insight into that. Now, John Ronson is known for a couple of very interesting and a very rare special that was, I don't know if you can still find it on YouTube or not. I did find it at one time somewhere and did actually download it. It's a BBC Channel 4 special called Secret Rulers of the World. And he meets with a lot of these people that were in the, that he talked about, military people, etc., and interviewed them. I think he interviewed Shannon in there. He also interviewed several other people with their different military techniques. So the whole idea is that he talked with these people in this. And it's quite fascinating that all of us know so little about this. All we do is know about these remote viewers, and he gets into there and talks about, particularly in Crazy Rulers of the World, he goes into the whole military stuff, but he goes into there's 3 parts of it. Part 1 is the Men Who Stare at Goats, Part 2 is Funny Torture, and the Psychic Foot Soldiers, which is the remote viewing program. So he covers all of that stuff, and he goes into these new inventive ways to get information and torture people, which is very interesting. Which basically none of that really works too well, and it's kind of, but it is very interesting to see how a lot of New Agers and people that we've heard of that are putting out music and doing other things were involved with all these programs of the government, and most people are. And of course, this was still a semi-naive time. We all know now that the government is Satan, and the military is his buddy. So the whole idea is that we certainly don't want to help these kind of military-industrial complexes who are basically working for their personal empowerment. They are making lots of money. Generals make millions from their illegal activities, as does a whole bunch of other people in the military. And ironically, the military is full of gangs. The Bloods, the Crips, and everybody else are in the military. Isn't that interesting? They got people who are threatening other people and harassing them, soldiers, in the military, running gangs and everything else. It just amazes me, and this is the kind of trash that we have in the military and the horrible military leadership we have. And let me quickly mention General Schwarzkopf, who at the end of the, if you can call it, end of the Iraqi initial war, told Saddam Hussein that he was perfectly fine to fly his helicopters wherever he wanted to. Of course, he knew that. He claims that this was just a military error, that he didn't think that that was important. You don't think helicopters are important? So he murdered all sorts of Kurds and had this ability to strike out anywhere he wanted to, which was gave him deliberately, because part of the military is to protect the Muslim empire, particularly the Muslim empire of the Turkish, German, Soviet Union, Muslim Federation. He protected them and wanted to get rid of the Kurds, who were kind of troublemaker Muslims, for the establishment. He knew it, he allowed it, and that's it. That's the kind of corruption you have. So grow up, people. This is what's really happening with these people that are protecting you from what? The United States has never been physically attacked, ever. Only Hawaii was hit in a kind of a goofy response. We've never been under threat except from the British in 1812, who burned the White House. So, yeah, people need to understand what's going on, and who have been trying to burn the White House ever since. So this is a great book. So it goes into the mind control done by the CIA, how they tortured people, slipped them LSD, all the other things. And this one guy who's still fighting for his father's justice, who they claim was a problem and committed suicide. Yeah, we know all the suicides that happened. They threw him out of a building. And as I said, the end of the book by Ronson is very, very depressing, extremely dark. So the book itself goes into that, names and has everything straight. Now, when you get to the movie, I think the movie's a lot of fun. It's great. I think it gives you kind of a bigger picture. And I think the people they represent there, which is not at all like the book. The book is a non-fiction book. It's not written as a story. It's not written as anything like they show in the movie. And but it does kind of give you an idea of what was going on there and the type of people. And Jeff Bridges, who's really this Colonel Shannon, this kind of wild guy. He's not all that wild. None of these military people are as wild as this film would like to be. And of course, they like to be known as being wild and whatever. But the military's got a lot of groups of nut jobs in there. Ed Dames, who prophesies the Martians are coming every year. It just goes on and on. It's pretty scary that these people have guns and control people. You can imagine why there's so many problems when an actual battle starts. So the movie is very good. George Clooney stars in it. I think it gives you a good understanding of what they were talking about. It is a satire. It is a comedy, and they gave it a very upbeat to it. I think it was written very well, because you can't take the original book and write it as a movie. It was a documentary talking about very diverse things. They kind of tied it all together. So the writer of the book did a very good job taking these concepts and showing them, at least in a very gross manner. The movie combines characters, changes names. There's nothing in the movie that is based on any specific person, maybe for legal reasons. But it's a combination of characters and people. They've taken a character like George Clooney, combined him with a bunch of other people. They have a guy who represents Guy Savali, the guy who actually supposedly was able to use his mental powers to stop the heart of a goat, even though Uri Geller claimed to have done that way before that. But they don't use the same names, but there is and some characters, as I said, are a combination of several characters. So I think it's very well done, and it's very interesting. I just watched it again before making this particular video here, and it's very interesting. So the whole idea is that this is a fun thing. It kind of gives you an idea of what's going on. It kind of shows you the potential power of things. It also tends to show you the ridiculousness of particularly the ignorant military community that's against all this stuff, trying to embrace something that is way out of their reality. So I think it gives you a pretty good idea. But if you really want to, it's a good idea to watch the actual Secret Rulers of the World that he produced, which is very difficult to find, from BBC4. And he's done a few other things of less importance. But he's all got very interest. I find all his stuff interesting, even though I find it warped through his pseudo-intellectual, upper-class intellectual thinking. There's a way that people who live in sheltered lives in academia and get into certain companies where they're all treated well and have medical policies and come from basically good families and been able to get their degrees relatively easy, that look at the world as something. It's an arrogance of that, this is how things are and what's better or not. So he has that kind of strange pseudo-intellectual reality about him. So you have to be careful of his statements. He doesn't get a lot of things. He certainly knows nothing about psychic empowerment and knows nothing about real fighting and military. This is a guy that, is a short little guy who's a writer. He's an intellectual. He's not a guy that's punched anybody probably his entire life. So we got to understand, he also is not a researcher into the psychic sciences, manifesting sciences. He knows absolutely nothing about this, so he looks at things from his own skewed viewpoint. So that means that he doesn't get a lot of things and makes some misstatements and other things. But as a general view, this is a great fun. I recommend this to everybody so you can kind of get a feel what goes on here. A documentary in this area certainly would be fascinating, but there's really never much that's been done. There's a new one that came out, The Third Eye Spies, which is supposed to have been written by by Russell Targ, done by a nobody of importance. Apparently, Russell Targ and all his money and connections couldn't get a real movie producer to get out and make a serious film for him, and claims he has been trying to for years. Again, it shows you the kind of problem that's out there in terms of getting this information out. Sure, the government wants to use and abuse you, and they continue to push the remote viewing program. They have their spies everywhere looking for talented people, yet they don't back it with any of their own money. They want you to pay money to be trained somewhere else, and then one of the many trainers out there then will filter you into their organization, as has been proven with Lynn Buchanan and his training people, that he's still connected at his ripe, very old age, that he still has been contacted for government work and asked one of his top students to do the work, which has been stated by that student in public. So this is a great film going into it. You can't take it 100% seriously. It is a story. It is a fact-based story with an awful lot of fun, misrepresentations, and characters put in there to make an interesting film. It is not factual. It is not non-fiction. It's based on non-fiction actions that is all combined, meshed together, and so forth. The reporter they show in the film, which is supposed to be John Ronson, is not how it happened. And he's also playing an American, the guy who's the reporter, of course, a Brit who plays an American. Well, that's not what he is. John is what I keep calling Ron. John Ronson is a Brit. Now a naturalized American. So, all that needs to be understood when you look at this, is not take it serious. You want to get the facts of things, but it's a fun way to see kind of what was going on, particularly the 1st Earth Battalion. There's some real facts there. They looked around, they did all these things. It's very, very interesting. And of course, none of that came to anything. The bottom line came to, as the military will always do in the end, is going to just be brutal. And that you just go out and kill everybody. That's how you solve something. Well, unfortunately, this is true to a large degree. And I've watched how all the militaries around the world have functioned in Afghanistan. There are documentaries on all this, and these documentaries are twisted, turned, broken, etc. But it shows you exactly how the military works and how they fight a war, which is so bizarre, it isn't even funny. So the whole idea is that you could never win a war the way that all men, not only the American military, apparently the British, the Dutch, and everybody else I've watched, and it's a pretty fascinating show because this is the real stuff. They take you out in the field with these people, how they fight. As I said, I'm going to make many more on this. But the getting into these areas and the use of all this, who now many people like Jim Marrs in his Psychic Spy book states is just part of the military now, that people learn, these special forces learn this remote viewing as a normal practice. So this has been embraced. Everybody knows it works, and they use it. But of course, they haven't thrown their guns down, and Colonel Shannon never said you should do that. Said the fact is, hey, let's try and work with them a little. That don't work. Let's shoot them in the head. Simple as that. So, you can't really be involved in remote viewing or any kind of psychic sciences without seeing and without reading this book and seeing this fun movie to give you a really interesting insight into really what's happening. Until next time.